On today's episode of Locked on Wild, he's back.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we celebrate the news. Kirill Kaprizov is expected to make his return to the lineup against the Utah Hockey Club tomorrow night. We'll take a look at how the Wild did in his absence, who stepped up the most. And we'll talk about another player that is making his return to the lineup too. So many healthy returns for the Minnesota Wild here today. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked on Wild since 2021 and a credentialed media member as well. And we've been waiting for this day for approximately 12 games. And it has been it's been a long journey from just hearing that Kirill was day-to-day, was banged up right after Christmas, and was initially held out of that first game. And then it ended up being 12. All told, 12 games missed by the Minnesota Wild superstar. And the Wild ended up going 7-5 in those 12 games, which, coupled with the other losses in the lineup, Jonas Brodin and Jared Spurgeon. More on Jared Spurgeon in a little bit. Coupled with those losses, I think you would take that stretch from this Minnesota Wild team navigating critical injuries to key pieces on the roster. It's not easy. It's not easy to lose a player who makes as much of an impact on the game as Kirill Kaprizov does. But the Wilds somehow managed to keep their heads above water and keep their heads afloat over the last 23 games to where they are still in the same spot they were when Kirill Kaprizov left compared to where they currently sit now. Still in second place, and the margin has shrunk, certainly. But the Minnesota Wild still find themselves in the second spot in the Central Division because the only teams that have been able to really gain any ground are the Dallas Stars and the Colorado Avalanche, as we expected they would. Winnipeg, with a game in hand, the Minnesota Wild are 5 points behind Winnipeg, which is basically the exact same spot that they were on December 1st. So the Wild have kept up. Their performance certainly has dipped, but they have kept up with the other top teams in the Central over this stretch. And now they get to welcome Kirill Kaprizov back to the lineup and slot him in right where we expected he would go. I didn't think for even a second that there was going to be any sort of attempt to keep Rossi, Matt Boldy, and Matt Zuccarello together, because the chemistry for that Kaprizov, Rossi, Zuccarello line was put them in pretty elite territory as a unit. They have played 251 minutes together as a group. Kaprizov, Rossi, Zuccarello. They're 14th in the NHL in terms of goals for. 17 goals scored as a trio compared to just 9 goals given up. So that is a 4.05 goals for. We're not talking expected. We're talking actual goals this year. 4.05 goals per 60 minutes and just 2.14 given up. So you're talking about a very good, very, very good scoring line. And I'll just put it this way. The line that has the most goals for this year, Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, and Gabe Vilardi, they have 32 goals in and we're talking 5-on-5 play. They have 32 goals in 617 minutes together. If you took the 251 that the Minnesota Wilds, that top trio has played, the Kaprizov, Rossi, and Zuccarello line, if they would have played 600 plus minutes together, they'd have infinitely more goals. If you take the 251, now bear with me because we know where I stand with math. That is basically four full games together in those 251 minutes and 17 goals. So let's just take 17. That's 4-ish per game. Now, if you take that over a 617 minutes, that is 10. The Kaprizov, Rossi, Zuccarello tandem in that same amount of time would have 40 goals together if they kept on their same pace. That's where I was trying to go. So it has been one of the more successful line combinations in the entirety of the NHL. And it's going to allow this Minnesota Wild team to put them back together to get, Kaprizov off the ground and running. And you look at who has stepped in the most in the absence of Kirill Kaprizov over these last 12 games. It's been his line mates. Marco Rossi, 5 goals in the last 12 games. He's got 12 points in the last 12 games. Matt Zuccarello has 14 points in the last 12 games, including 4 goals. Matt Boldy's got 11 points in the last 12 games, including 5 goals and 6 assists. So what you now have is you got Kaprizov with Rossi and Zuccarello, and the hope is that you can put Matt Boldy and Joel Eriksson Ek together. They have notable chemistry as a tandem. And Ryan Hartman's performance has improved over the last 12 games. Hartman's got 8 points in the last 12 games after going through a stretch in which he didn't have a single point in like 19 games. So the hope is that you're going to be able to attack teams with 2 lines. How often have we talked about the need for 2 scoring lines? It seems like it comes up on a daily basis. And the hope is that now you've got the depth in the lineup to be able to do that. But it's been the Matt Zuccarello and the Marco Rossi show for the Wild in Kirill Kaprizov's absence. And don't be surprised if that combination goes on an absolute tear here, because those two are going to be hot coming in. Question is always going to be, what about that second line? Now, it is of note that Marcus Johansson has not begun skating to ramp himself back up. He did have a concussion, which means that he has to miss at least 7 days, which is why he was immediately put on injured reserve. So, I do take as well from what we've seen with a couple of these other injuries. It seems like once the guys actually get on the ice and start skating, once when they get that ramp up going, that it's not too much longer after that before they find their way into the lineup. So still without Johansson for now, although I'm sure many listeners are not particularly upset by that notion. We'll see if Ryan Hartman can get that combination going, and if not, the Wild they'll just continue going right on down the list. But welcome back to Kirill Kaprizov. We missed you, And it was good to see other players kind of step up and take the lead, especially Marco Rossi on that front. But it's going to be great to see Kirill slot in with those three and get back to having a top 15 line combination in the league that I have no doubt is going to vault higher up the list as they get more time on the ice together. Of the top 15, they have the third fewest minutes, yet they still are in the top 15 in goals scored as a tandem in 5-on-5. And the 4.05 goals for per 60 minutes is seventh in the league right now. Behind McMichael, Dubois, and Wilson, Gensel, Point, Kucherov, Slafkovsky, Suzuki, Caulfield, Forsberg, Stamkos, Marchessault, Robinson, Kotkaniemi, and Nichas, and Voronkov, Monahan, and Marchenko. Somehow, Columbus, with the top goals for per 60 minutes line combination in the NHL of Voronkov, Monahan, and Marchenko. I figure that one out. But that's not the only return that the Minnesota Wild are going to get into the lineup, because it sounds as though Jared Spurgeon is ready to rock, and he will also hop back in for the Minnesota Wild. So we'll take a look at where his combination ranks with his expected pairing partner. That's all on the way as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just head to FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. At last check, the NFC and AFC championship games, it was the Philadelphia Eagles, a 5.5-point favorite over the Washington Commanders, and the Kansas City Chiefs were a close favorite over the Buffalo Bills in the AFC. So $5 bet. If you win, $300 in bonus bets right to you. So head to FanDuel.com today to get things started. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Let's set the scene for you coming up tomorrow. We will have a postcast for you after the game against Utah. Again, it just might be a little bit of a later start. I do have a game, and it's a little bit of a drive. So we'll hang out after the game is done. Just keep an eye on YouTube. I'll set it tentatively, and then we'll just react to it based off of what time the game gets done. And we've got more episodes coming up for you here the rest of this week. Sunday, we're going to go with a late one because I'll be on the road for this weekend. But Denny and I will have a live show for you Sunday at 8 p.m. Should be a big one, so make sure to tune in. Sunday night at 8. The other return that is expected coming up for the Minnesota Wild is Jared Spurgeon. Spurgeon was a full participant in practice once again, and he has been out since December 31st. That loss has also been felt by the Minnesota Wild, but you look at the record, and in the 10 games that Jared Spurgeon missed, the Wild went 6-4. But look at some of the areas I think where Spurgeon can help. Number one, obviously, the Wild allowed 33 goals in those 10 games. So that's 3.3 goals against per game, which it's on the high side. As far as in that same span, the 3.3 has the Wild 25th in the league. So that's one area that I think Spurgeon will be able to help in just that overall team defense. The other area that I look at that has really risen over the last month, honestly, is the shots against per game. Minnesota, and I'll pull up the numbers just for reference from the early part of the season. The Minnesota Wild are 30th in the NHL in the last 10 games. They're giving up almost 34 shots per game. And, more shots given up, more goals. Depends on where the shots come from, obviously, but there's a simple correlation there that the more shots you give up, the better chance there is that the other team is going to score some goals as well. This compares to the first 2 months of the season. I use, because it's pretty clear, it's a pretty clear kind of separating point. I just use the first 2 months of the season to really determine, because the Wild were 16-4-4 at that point. Honestly, you could probably go even a little bit. You could even go to December 3rd. The Wild were 17-4-4. They led the league in points. They were giving up 2.32 goals per game. So where are they at from December 3rd to now? Let's go to December 4th. So from the start of the season to December 3rd, 2.32 goals against per game. Minnesota Wild from December 4th to now, 3.36. A full goal higher than where they were at earlier in the season. Now, shots on goal. Minnesota Wild in those first 25 games of the season, 29 shots per goal or per game given up. In the last 22 games, it's 30.7. So it's not, the bump is not super noticeable. When you get those timetables evened out. But I think another area that is indicative of these shifts in performance is where a lot of these shots are coming from. The Minnesota Wild did such a good job against the Colorado Avalanche of limiting them from getting high danger chances. High danger chances are those, from right around the front of the net, those easiest areas to be able to score. And the Wild did not allow a single high danger scoring chance to the Colorado Avalanche in that 3-1 win on Monday. So you take away those types of looks, and you're going to have a much easier time of being able to come away with wins. Now, compare that to what happened in that 6-2 loss to the Nashville Predators, in which John Hines was pretty critical of the performance. He said, I knew the fighting that kind of stuff was going to have to go on. But he said, I felt like the game was certainly there. We just did not play well in key facets, which included giving the Nashville Predators essentially whatever they wanted on offense. Now, if this would load up, it's probably because I have like 80 different Money Puck tabs currently open. The Nashville Predators managed a 4.09 expected goals. Anytime I talk about the expected goals, I like to use this as an opportunity to explain what it means. So the expected goals factors in shot attempts, where the shot attempts come from, whether they're high danger or other varieties. And you take all those shots and you say, okay, based off of where all these came from, you would expect in a simulation that a team would score this many goals. So if you played out on any given night with standard conditions, that game against Nashville, they would have scored 4 goals, which means that the defense did not play particularly well at all. Marc-Andre Fleury was just under 1 goal below expected. So Fleury didn't have his best stuff in that game either. But look at these numbers. So there were 54 total unblocked shot attempts by the Nashville Predators. 11 of them were medium danger. Medium danger is, from the top of the faceoff circle, basically to it's basically this faceoff circles and in between. That's medium danger. High danger is anything from the faceoff circles to the net. The Minnesota Wild allowed 11 medium danger shot attempts and 5 high danger shot attempts. So of those 54 shot attempts, 16 of them were from the faceoff circles and in. That's not a great recipe for success for any team. And I think that's another area that Jared Spurgeon can assist with this Minnesota Wild team. Now, we talked about the impact of Brock Faber coming back and getting plugged in with Jake Middleton. The Middleton-Faber combination, based off of defensive pairings this year that have played a total of 200 minutes together, Jake Middleton and Brock Faber are fourth in the NHL in terms of 1.2 goals against per 60 minutes. I'm not talking hypothetical goals. I'm talking actual legitimate goals that have been scored against them. It's 1.2 goals against per 60 minutes. So they limit opponent scoring, but they also have been able to chip in offensively themselves with a 3.21 goals for per 60 minutes. Declan Chisholm and Jared Spurgeon are 12th in the league with a 1.51 goals against per 60 minutes. So you're getting that pairing back because Spurgeon is he's gonna slot in with Declan Chisholm. Pretty solid decision right there for at least until Jonas Brodin is ready to come back, because that pairing has been very good too. So you go from having none of those, you go from having only one of those four like a couple of weeks ago to now having all of them back. That's going to be a big boost for the Minnesota Wild defensively as the season unfolds. You've got two of the top 15 D pairings in the league in terms of goals against per 60 minutes. And I'll say this too. I know we don't like the combination. I see it in the comments. I get DMs about it. John Merrill and Zach Bogosian are 17th in the NHL right now at 1.65 goals against per 60 minutes. And that's in almost 300 minutes on the ice together. Not hypotheticals, not expected goals, actual tangible goals given up. So you are going to those as your pairings. And you've got Jonas Brodin making his way back too. So I think we can say that the defense is getting back to where it was. Now, it's unfortunate it comes at the expense of David Yiricek. So let's finish the show today by talking a little bit about what Yiricek brought to the table in his few games with the team. We'll talk about what we liked and why he inspires a lot of confidence in being able to be a steady member of this team. We'll talk about all that as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by SelectQuote. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage of up to $5 million. No medical exam required. And it's more affordable than you'd think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/LockedOnNHL. Go to selectquote.com/LockedOnNHL today to get started. That's selectquote.com/LockedOnNHL. SelectQuote. They shop, you save. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, reminder, postcast for you tomorrow night against the Utah Hockey Club. We'll also have a couple of episodes for you between now and then. Always just have to wait to see what's going on in practice because it seems like it changes. You got all the injury situations. And so talked at length about the impending return of Jared Spurgeon and Kirill Kaprizov. So now we get to the unfortunate part of the day. And that, of course, being the fact that David Yiricek was sent back down. I want to start. Michael Russo laid out some of the possibilities for the Wild. They only had a couple of options as for what to do. So I'm just going to read what he tweeted out earlier today. The Minnesota Wild reassigned David Yiricek. Clear sign that Kirill Kaprizov and Jared Spurgeon are back tomorrow. It was truly the only real option to make the math work. John Hines told me today he is jacked with what he has seen from Yiricek and is excited to see him continue to grow. A response to that tweet from Ryan Erickson, looking at cap numbers, would waiving Dermott and Shore have been an option too? Russo said that was the only other option. He said Shore doesn't need waivers right now, but they can't get rid of Shore right now with a 5-game road trip coming up. It makes no sense to waive Dermott right now to keep Yiricek, who would be scratched anyway. And let's talk about this. When Jonas Brodin is ready to return, Dermott is the roster move there. So this was always going to be the case. And I know there's frustration with continuing to put John Merrill and Zach Bogosian in the lineup. I read the numbers. I know the eye test does not jive with the overall stats. And I understand there's legitimate concern about hitching your wagons to players of that caliber when we get to playoff time. I understand all that. There's nothing I can do about that. That is the choice that Bill Guerin made, and that's the team that they're going to roll with. The other options were to put Jonas Brodin on long-term injured reserve, which means that he'll be out until February 1st. Just because he hasn't ramped up, we see how quickly it seems like Wild players have gone from just ramping up to back in the lineup. It doesn't take them long. But here's the thing I think to take away from what we saw from David Yiricek through his first couple of games of action. He played all told in 6 games, had a goal, an assist, was a +2. Had 2 penalty minutes, 4 shots on goal, played about 13 minutes per night on the ice. The thing that I take away is this. There's a solid base there. There's a solid base in David Yiricek's game. You know, he has great instincts offensively, which is something that I think the Wild have enough defense-first defensemen that will be coming up through the lineup, or that can put less in offensively and focus more on the defense to be able to mesh with these guys. It's all about just making sure if there are parts of a player's game, just making sure that you have a way to kind of cover that. There's no better way to handle that than by playing somebody who has a little bit more defensive ability. David Yiricek was never going to be a shutdown defensive defenseman, but can he play the position? Yes. Can he show that he learns on the fly. He's quick to recover depending on what happens out on the ice. Does he have all those little check boxes that you look for in NHL defensemen? And I know it's just a handful of games, but I think I'm comfortable enough saying that this looks like a situation where the Columbus Blue Jackets just really didn't have a solid plan as to what to do with a prospect. And Bill Guerin, in, I'm sure, discussing with Judd Brackett and Brad Bombardier, they put their heads together and said, what can we do to put this kid in position to succeed? And it looks as though they have found somebody who's got solid footing and a solid ability to, be in the mix defensively. It's early. It's very early, but you threw Yiricek into a very tough situation. I mean, you were like I said over the course of the last couple of weeks, the Wild were basically playing 5 third-pairing defensemen in their 6. It's a tough situation to just have a bunch of guys that you're trying to have cover everything that aren't used to doing it. And the fact that Yiricek stood out and impressed of that grouping tells you everything you need to know. Because he was playing amongst some regular NHL defensemen, and the fact that he stood out of that group should get you excited for what's to come. There's a lot of work to do, for sure, but I think everybody that watched, I think everybody within the organization is pretty pumped that that was the first step for David Yiricek at this point in his Minnesota Wild career. I like what I see, and I think he's got some good games ahead of him. So we'll see where things go, but of course we will keep you going here throughout the rest of the week as we continue to update you here at Locked On Wild. As mentioned, we'll have a postcast for you coming up tomorrow night after the Utah game. So join us then. We'll see what happens. We'll see if the Minnesota Wild can get a little winning streak going here now that some key pieces are starting to return to the lineup. But appreciate everybody tuning in as you do throughout the week. And we'll catch you for another episode coming up tomorrow right here on Locked On Wild. Make sure to subscribe if you have not already so you don't miss any new episodes throughout the week right here as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.